Ivan Pavlenko, From Family to Family, Chapter 3, Part 9.2, At Party and Household Work, read by Natalia Bysova. I had a lot of work. From morning until late at night, I was on my feet, and without days off. I slept little, lost weight, but got tanned. Every day I began with tasks at the office, then worked with personnel. I gave certain tasks, organized socialist competitions, held various meetings, and spoke in front of people. Communists, as it was expected then, were in leadership positions. The former chairman of the collective farm, Pavlo Yosipovich Solonucha, worked as a supply manager. My good son's father, Andriy Grigorovich Galivets, was an agronomist. My youth comrade Stepan Sokolovsky was a foreman of a garden brigade. My cousin Ivan Andreevich Pavlenko was a farm manager. Ivan Grigorovich Elshansky was a foreman of a tractor brigade. Many of my former Komsomol members worked directly in the fields and on farms. Among them were Nastya Fedorivna Romanenko, Katerina Vasilyevna Kumpan, Ivan Sergeyevich Sinichenko, Grigory Mitrofanovich Kesilь, Grigory Savich Нужный, Uliana Pavlivna Solonucha, Yevdokiya Grigorievna Galivets, Mikhailo Dmitrovich Galivets. That was my support and hope. It would be possible to work if the same district committee did not interfere, pull, or interfere with economic affairs. It was interested not so much in specific result as in correct numbers and demonstrative successes. It was still early, but you had to plant and sow. The rye was not ripe, and you had to mow and grind. The sugar beets had not yet gained strength, and you had to dig and take them to the factory so that the region would show off in the forefront of gathering, digging, and taking away. And what came out of that, losses or benefits, the bosses didn't care. Well, what kind of owner would graze livestock on winter crops? Or would he leave the dairy herd without a bull? Only adventurers who cared not about the rise of agriculture, but about their career, could act that way. When Strelets, energetic and strong-willed, first appeared in the area, I thought, who is he? A party Chapayev or just another party swindler? Life itself gave the answer to my questions. He began with the traditional personnel shake-up for every new secretary of the district committee. Former secretaries, heads of departments, and instructors were fired. Their places were taken by people who were verified and loyal to their boss, whom he had brought with him, and he put some of the local lawyer classes in leadership chairs so that they would remember who their godfather was. The personnel leapfrog spread from the district party committee to other organizations and collective farms. For the slightest disobedience, the secretary fired them from work and imposed party penalties despite their business qualities and previous merits. He showed trust only to those who were personally devoted to him and carried out any order of their boss. They say that a fish rots from the head. In Patriot of America, Khrushchev himself used adventurous plans, and his ideologists described them as a new achievement in theory and practice of communist construction. At one of the plenums of the Central Committee, he offered peasants to sell their cows to collective farms at prices set by the state for the delivered meat in live weight. It, they said, was beneficial not only to the state, but also to the peasants. The state, having better feed and grazing, would receive more milk for the working class, and the peasants would not have to worry about maintaining their cows and would work better on a collective farm. And milk would be supplied to them from the collective farm. They could open special stalls. Khrushchev described it well from the rostrum, but he did not know well the nature of collective farm production and the deplorable state it was still in. A man's cow would never give the same amount of milk on a collective farm. At home, it was well groomed, fed, and watered. But on a collective farm, those best feeds were limited in the spring to straw, and the milk yield was a few liters. It was cunning advice from a high platform, but it was perceived as a directive that had to be followed. And another campaign began, popularly nicknamed Pandemonium. Newspapers and radio in all directions praised the wisdom and foresight of Khrushchev, as well as those conscious peasants who had already taken their cows to the collective farm and were then calmly drinking milk from the collective milk yield. In those days, Strelets was, as they say, on horseback. He gathered the party and economics activists of the region, called and convinced, demanded and threatened. Representatives of the district committee went to all villages to hold meetings and specific events for the socializations of cows. But the first results were disappointing. Only individual owners gave up their cows, who, due to their advanced age, could no longer graze them or prepare feed for the winter. Then Strelets began to take more decisive actions. He started with Tokari, where the chairman of the collective farm, Chaika, was similar to him. They gathered all the communists, as well as economics leaders, and some non-party activists. They were required to undertake a patriotic undertaking, to be the first to take their cows to a collective farm. The issue was posed bluntly. Whoever disagreed, he had to put his party card on the table and leave his leadership position. In the voluntary way, 12.5 cows were moved from home barns to typical collective premises. And in the evenings, the general meeting began. It went on violently and sharply. In the end, Strelets presented an ultimatum. Whoever does not hand over the cows, let him graze them in his yard. At dawn, the owners rushed to move their cattle out to pasture, but activists blocked the road and didn't let them in. People kept their cows at home for a day or two, and on the third, they took them to the collective farm. Following Tokari, similar executions with the participation of Strelets were carried out in other villages. The district newspapers presented them to readers as a voluntary and patriotic expression of the will of the peasants who supported the party's policy aimed at strengthening collective farms and raising the living standards of the people. The district committee sent the head of the agriculture department, Alshansky, to our meeting, who was more moderate and did not engage in obvious extremism. He spent a long time convincing my fellow villagers of the benefits of collective dairy farming. He promised that for each delivered cow, the money that the state had already lent to collective farms would be paid in a timely manner. The chairman of the collective farm, Shovko, assured that from Monday, the stall will be open and milk will be sold at cost, but not more than a liter for each family member. People I had trained also spoke and agreed to bring their cows to the farm even that day. Those were mainly party members, activists, as well as men whose cows were old and unproductive. I knew that such a replenishment would cause damage to the collective farm, but it was necessary to report at least something to the district committee so as not to bring about troubles like Tokari's. We bought about 50 cows, but there was nowhere to place them. The horses were moved to temporary fenced places, and in their place, cows were placed in the stables. The milkmaids were also barely found. After Khrushchev had allowed the issuance of passports to collective farmers, the number of working-age population began to decline sharply. People fled the village, especially young people. 2 months later, May and June, a lot happened on the collective farm. Its consolidation was difficult and economically unjustified. It caused us a lot of trouble, and yet we snatched 160,000 out of 600 rubles from the collective farm Ukraine and began to build a new barn. In addition, it was necessary to deal daily with the cultivation of crops and caring for crops, haymaking and hay harvesting, and preparation for the harvest. And then the exam session came. At the end of June, I handed over party affairs to my deputy, Andriy Grigorovich Galevets, and went to college for a month.